Joined now by Dr. Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Dr. Diker, great to have you with us here on I24 News.
Nice to be with you. Nice to be with you, I24.
The details emerging, they paint a scene out of a movie, basically. I want to talk to you about the setting where this took place, though. This was the NATO summit in Turkey. How should the United States be responding to the possibility that an Iranian team could have operated so close to an airport in Turkey that it could have launched shoulder-fired missiles?
Well, you know, this whole thing is like a James Bond series edition, and we don't know all the details. You know, the reporting is based on is based on information that may be absolutely true or partially true. It's certainly very dramatic, and if the truth is that the story is a very good product of influence and political warfare by the United States towards the Iranian regime or against the Iranian regime, and that itself has value in this jihad that the Iranian regime keeps launching and advancing against the United States, Israel, and the Western alliance. That's for sure. The fact is that the Iranian regime can penetrate Turkey whenever it decides to. We know that in fact that the Iranian regime was unable to send certain funds to Hezbollah, so they actually requested from the Turkish government to send those funds to the regime. So the ability of the Iranians to penetrate Turkey, even by agreement, is pretty clear.
Well, Dan, what impact could this have on negotiations? You say that this could be used to Washington's benefit, perhaps, but even though we don't know the full details, it's clear that there was some sort of threat because the president has admitted this. If Washington has known about this threat for weeks and still continued some sort of indirect negotiations, what does this impact tell us about the reason for keeping diplomacy alive?
Well, we know that the president himself has said that there are some moderate, in his view, this is not my view, this is the president's view, and the view of even J.D. Vance, vice president, and some of advisors around the president, not including Secretary of State Rubio and not including Secretary of War Hegseth, that there are some moderates within the IRGC, within the Iranian regime, and then there are, the more extreme elements led by Ahmed Vahidi. And I think this is one of the mistakes that the administration may be making, is that there really is no such thing as a moderate leader in the Islamic Republic as part of the IRGC, but they compartmentalize it. So they can justify diplomacy to themselves, even knowing that this threat apparently has been a long-standing threat, at least several weeks, because they say to themselves, well, President Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Araghchi are certainly not part of this because we've been negotiating with them and they've made what the president has said are reasonable deals. And so they've compartmentalized the bad guys with the less bad guys on the Iranian regime side. And that's the way they continue, what was the expression? To fight terror, to move diplomacy forward as if there's no terror, and to fight terror as if there's no diplomacy, which was sort of used during the fateful Oslo years in Israel. That kind of logic, that type of compartmentalization between the enemy diplomats versus the enemy terrorists. Well, and I think it's a mistake, and it's a mistake here. But they keep using that to move forward with the regime. Well,
we do gain some more insight from at least some of the minds within the regime. An advisor to the commander of the IRGC, Mohammad Reza Nakti, in an interview with PBS, he said that Iran could just prolong the war with President Trump until he's out of office. What does this indicate about the mindset of the regime, and how could this have an impact on the current standstill negotiations that we're seeing right now?
Well, you've asked the key question, and that is, how is it actually that people in the West misunderstand the Iranian regime's political and religious culture? That culture is based on the forever war And the question that the West keeps asking, or many in the West, and certainly those that either support or oppose the president, is why is America, fighting this forever war? No, the forever war is the Iranian regime warfare strategy. That is the DNA of the regime. To keep every single day is another victory for them, that they survive, that they deceive, that they sabotage. This is their war. And this, and the threat, whether the threat is real or whether it is, whether the source is less believable, which in this case I think is not the case, because if in fact it's true that the Israelis supplied intelligence, the source, obviously Israel is an excellent intelligence source, and the United States would take that very seriously. But even if the source were more doubtful, something like this, an assassination attempt like this, they would take seriously. But clearly, this is part of the Iranian regime's warfare. Would be to, if it weren't the Israelis, but someone on the Arab side, would be to leak this type of information and show the Americans being weak, in the sense that they have to hide the president, they have to watch the president sort of slip away in a smaller plane. From an Arab, Muslim, and from an Iranian regime point of view, this makes the Americans look weak, right? Because it makes them look like they're scattering all over the place to avoid the strong Iranian regime potential assassination. So there's all of this sort of political, psychological warfare at play here, certainly from the Iranian side, and I would suggest also from the American side.
Well, Dan, stay with me here if you can, because I want your opinion on this next topic as well. Because beyond the threat against Trump himself, there are questions growing over how much influence the president still holds in the region. According to Politico, several U.S. allies are now questioning Washington's leverage after Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly rejected the American-backed 15-point disarmament plan for Gaza. Netanyahu stands firm that Israel will not withdraw until Hamas fully disarms. Well, the plan ties disarmament to a phased Israeli pullback. Well, the Board of Peace insists the proposal is still moving forward, but the public divide is now raising doubts about whether Trump can bring Israel and Hamas across the finish line. So, Dr. Diker, back to you. If U.S. allies are reportedly questioning President Trump's regional leverage, how could this impact ongoing peace talks in Gaza, in Lebanon, and of course, as we were talking about, in Iran?
Very good question. And the first answer to your very good question is the Mecca alliance between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. That unprecedented new alliance is the result of a feeling on America's so-called Arab allies, certainly Saudi, but according to President Trump, also Turkey and, of course, Pakistan, that the Americans are perceived as unfortunately expressing a kind of waning power and influence. And therefore, when they perceive that America is weak, whether that is the case or not, they begin to really in new structures. How does that impact the possibility for Hamas and Israel, or for Gaza to be demilitarized, de-radicalized? This 15-point plan, so-called, which is the implementation arm of the original Trump 20-point plan, is essentially a kidnapper. It's a robber, a thief in the night of the original plan. The original plan calls for, number one, de-radicalization, demilitarization of Gaza, which means that all the Hamas weapons are out of the Gaza Strip. All of a sudden, we have in this 15-point disarmament agreement something very different that ties Israeli, what they call sector by sector withdrawals, to what they call decommissioning Hamas weapons to a new Arab force, which is heavily armed by Palestinians that come from Judea and Samaria, that come from the PA-controlled areas of what's known as the former West Bank of Jordan. And therefore, the Hamas will very easily slip in and integrate itself into this new force. So Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying, wait a second, this is a deception. This is not real. That does not reflect what the original 20-point plan established. So he didn't go into detail on that. He basically said, as it is, Israel rejects.
But Dan, the Board of Peace says that Israel is not going to be asked to withdraw based on promises alone. So when it comes to some sort of a verification process, what would address Israel's concerns?
What would address Israel's concerns is if all the weapons, including what they call personal weapons, which is a new addendum to the new disarmament agreement. There was no such thing as the Hamas being able to keep personal weapons, even though Ambassador Mladenov of Bulgaria, you know, the chief ambassador of this disarmament plan, who's a very fine individual, and I've met him personally myself some years ago, and he has the greatest of intentions, and he's a good man. But the Hamas, Israel can never accept any weaponry being held in the hands of Hamas, because they only need personal weapons to maintain the control neighborhood by neighborhood in their part of what's left of the Gaza Strip, the 40% that they control. And as we hold our discussion on I-24, they are murdering and torturing dissidents in Gaza. How come the Board of Peace doesn't point that out? That there are assassinations, summary executions, and torture going on right now in the tunnels of Gaza by the Hamas towards other Gaza families that want to see Hamas out of Gaza. And that is what is going to happen here. I think we need to be very clear that Israel will not accept a Gaza in which the Hamas has any role, not governmental, not political, and not military. So that's basically where we are, because there's no way that Israel's going to risk, you know, even 1% of another October 7th invasion massacre. And this disarmament agreement does not guarantee the order of operations that the original Egyptian-sponsored 20-point plan, which Israel agreed to together with the United States, had spoken about.
All right, Dr. Dan Diker, great to have you with us on I24 News. Appreciate you sharing your perspective with us today. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much.